Hello, my name is Jada, and today I wanted to get on here and encourage someone who may feel like where they are currently, they can't build what God told them to build where they are. And when I say where you are, it could be a hometown or wherever you're physically living. It could be due to lack of resources. God's probably spoken to you about places He's called you to move to, visions, dreams. He's told you what's to come, but what you're looking at right now, you don't see that. And what one thing the enemy tries to do is convince us that we cannot build what God's telling us to build until we get to this specific city, until we move to the place that God has called us to move to. When in reality, a lot of times God is telling us to build right where we are, start preparing right where we are with what we have. You might not have all the resources right now. You might feel stagnant in the city that you're in, but know that God has you there for a reason. And if He still has you there, you're still on assignment. You're still on assignment for your family. You're still on assignment for your community. You're still on assignment for wherever God has placed you, and He will release you when it's time for you to be released. Because one thing that God has shown me is I was unknowingly moving out of selfish ambition. God has given me words about specific cities He's called me to, and a very specific city in particular. He's been speaking to me about the city for years, and there was this recent point where I thought He was telling me to go like ASAP, like right now, and it ended up being the enemy using emotions of feeling like I've outgrown the space that I'm in to try to have me abort the mission, which is here where I am, being a light for those around me and other things that God has told me to still build and plant here. But what the enemy may be trying to get you to do is abort the mission. And that is not of God. Even if you feel uncomfortable, even if you don't feel like you fit in where you are, or you just feel like you've outgrown the space that you're in, know that when the time is right, God will release you. It's not up to us to exalt ourselves. It's not up to us to try to move out of alignment of God's timing, or we shouldn't be trying to do that, because the last thing we want is anything outside of God's timing and outside of His will, because then it becomes an idol. And that's really what it is, becoming an idol and wanting the thing more than we want to be in God's will and in His presence. And if you feel like you're lacking joy, know that in God's presence is fullness of joy. And I was looking at Psalm 16, verse 11, where it says, "Thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy." What God highlighted to me is that when we're not in God's presence, we don't experience joy. When we are in God's presence, we will always experience joy, because joy is a fruit of the Spirit. When we're walking by the Spirit and not by the flesh, we will experience joy. It don't matter where you are or what type of circumstances. It could be a very hard season. Trust me, I understand. I understand. But there is still joy. Their joy is not dependent on once we get to that city, or once the business blows up, or once this vision that God put into our minds come to pass. Joy is now. Joy is right now, in God's presence, spending time with Him, and also being expectant for the things that God has spoken over your life, knowing that it will come to pass, and not sitting in, I don't want to say despair, but like stagnancy, and just waiting for it to come to pass to where you're not doing anything at all. But knowing both exist, you can be present and be preparing and expecting for the words that God has spoken over your life. If He's called you to singing, you don't have to wait. It's not once you get the opportunity, the joy is gonna come. No, you can experience joy now, knowing what God said is gonna come to pass, and knowing that you serve the one and only true living God. Like, that should bring us joy. And I'm saying this, I'm speaking to myself as well, because the world teaches you won't experience joy until you get the things, or until this happens or this happens. But we don't take on that mentality as believers, because we're meant to be set apart. We're meant to renew our minds. Romans 12:2, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That is a process. It's important to recognize that a lot of the ways that we've been taught about being successful is worldly. Because if you don't get the opportunity, or something doesn't blow up, that doesn't mean that you're not successful. Success in God's eyes is being in His will and being in His presence, and making sure we're walking uprightly with Christ. It's not dependent on what we're doing in our works and what we're producing. I say all that to say, if you're feeling discouraged, if you're feeling like you need to escape your environment right now, surrender those feelings to Jesus, because you'd be surprised of how the enemy will use fleeting emotions, or even if you've been feeling like that for a while, and convince you that you're doing something wrong, or like you must be out of alignment because you're like nothing's happening. But it's not that nothing's happening, it's just it's not the time for what God has said to come to pass. But it is up to us to prepare for the words that God has spoken. Seeking God on what that type of preparation looks like. If He told you to start a business, okay, God, what does the business plan look like? If He told you to start creative directing, what is the role of a creative director? Looking up those type of roles, and not just sitting, waiting in a place of idleness, but more so waiting, like when God's timing is right, this will come to pass and I will be prepared. So do not use this season as a season of sitting, just hoping and wishing it'll come to pass. I mean, yes, we should be hoping, but like don't let the enemy convince you that you should just sit and not embrace joy right now because something didn't happen, but more so move in alignment with God's will and prepare. Prepare. I hope this encouraged someone. I will see you in the next video.